Hi, good evening everyone, and welcome. This is, as we said in our introduction, our 5th Facebook Live event and probably the last one of this year. So if you're watching now or if you're joining us later, we'll be covering some of the things that have happened over the last few months, but also looking forward to what's happening in the new year. But I think our last one, Kishan, was before September when we had our 5-year anniversary, so it's been a little while. Fair few things to catch up on.
Yeah, definitely.
Since then.
We had a good anniversary and celebrating, meeting some of our clients, and networking. So it was good event.
It was a good event. It kind of gave us the opportunity to think about all the different service areas we're now working in, and the people that are in the team, and really what strides the firm has made over the last few years. So it was a really, really great evening. So, I mean, look, what we built this as an intellectual property-focused session. However, what we are going to also do, given that it was the budget today, is talk a bit about the budget and how it's going to be affecting businesses. I think it's obviously important for our clients to know about the key things to take away from that. We thought we'd do a quick update on GDPR because there were some issues arising out of some of the kind of recent news events. So there's something about Uber in the press just recently on data protection breach, and also then talk about the IP, tying that in with some of the stuff around the budget and royalty payments, so on and so forth. So maybe what we should do is start with the budget.
Yes, let's start with the budget.
Okay.
There's obviously been quite a few changes this time. It's interesting to see what's happened. And what was your view on that?
Okay, so I don't know if many of you had a chance to watch Philip Hammond earlier today or kind of follow up afterwards. I was kind of following it on my kind of BBC Live and Guardian News live updates. I think for me, and I know you've been kind of busy with clients and kind of in courses and things all day, was some of I think the thinking around the budget is right. So there seems to be some money towards the digital economy, artificial intelligence, electric cars, skills training in the digital economy and technology, more funding for teachers in IT space. I think that's obviously desirable and completely needed. So in that sense, I think some positive things to take away from that. I think businesses, I saw that the London Chamber of Commerce put out a brief statement to say that they were pleased, and I think CBI also followed up to say pleased to see that the business rates are being linked to CPI, not RPI, and I think there's a small difference between the two, which means it's better for businesses. So I think those are positive things, and my takeaway from it was that those things are in the right direction. They've clearly been listening to some of the concerns being raised by businesses on the rate side. I think also on the housing side.
Yes.
So one of the issues that businesses face is where do staff live? They're having to travel a really long way to get in sometimes into London, and so the cost of housing is high and all those things. So I mean, many of you will have seen that stamp duty has been removed for houses less than £300,000.
Yeah, that's great. Fantastic news.
Yeah, and if you
I really welcome that.
Yeah, it is very good news. And if for properties in London, the first £300,000 is going to be stamp duty free, up to £500,000 for first time buyers. So we'll see how it translates in real life. I mean, some people have predicted it might actually push the price of housing up, because if you're selling, you might well go, well,
so it might defeat the purpose of what they're doing,
it might defeat the purpose.
And I think, there's two sides to it. I think I've also heard that because of Brexit, prices will come down at some point. So I think it's a balancing act, but I do feel that in central London prices will still remain quite high. Yeah. And I don't think stamp duty will make much difference. I think we'll probably see a lot more growth around the commuter belt, in areas like Luton and places like that where commuters can get into London quite easily, but live at relatively low prices.
Yeah. No, I think
that's the cost of living.
I think that's true. I mean, what they also said is and I haven't read the detail, or I don't know the detail on this, but giving some help to smaller developers, freeing up the space that's being bought out by larger developers so that people are actually using it. So, fairly good indicators. I would say, though, the other 2 points to take away is that there's been a £3 billion pledge to deal with a no-deal Brexit. Now, many people know my view on it, so that seems to be, the government basically saying we're readying ourselves in the event that we can't get a transition deal or whatever it is that might be thrashed out between 2019.
Yeah, and that's a lot of money if you think about
money.
it. But I guess there's two sides to the argument. I mean, I guess it's sort of a safety net as well. So if we do leave Brexit, we need to think about alternative trade deals and plans. I think that money will go towards finding that, sourcing that.
Yeah.
So I think we need to have good people on board and start getting good international trade deals in place.
Yeah.
Before that.
Thank you, Anura, for joining. And if you have any questions, please do send them to us. I think last time, Anura, you won a trip to the Houses of Parliament, which was a very enjoyable afternoon, actually, for both of us. So that was good. So yes, that was the first thing. Payment towards Brexit.
Yeah.
Lower growth forecast has been reduced. There was no direct link back to Brexit, but I think most people feel that that's clearly having an effect. I think they've had to revise down growth forecasts. So, those are key takeaways from the budget today.
Yeah. And just one other point, Anura has obviously joined in. He says hey, so we say hey back. He's obviously in the finance and space. And so it's kind of good news for investors because the EIS investment limits are now doubled. Which is quite good welcome news for investors. Yeah.
No, I think on that note, actually, I think that this ties in really neatly, actually, with the things we're going to be talking about. I think that one of the focuses for the economy generally has to be technology. I mean, we're okay at the moment, but Japan, China, lots of other countries are. I think 70% of the innovation is coming from those places. So to have, an attractive scheme, the EIS scheme is attractive for investors, and if that's been doubled, that's good news. I think hopefully it means more investment in our technology sectors. So we need to look after that and make sure it's being nurtured. And I think in that sense, welcome. That's very welcome.
Yeah, great for the startup world, and if they're putting more money into technology, you can see that these kind of schemes. So for the viewers that don't know what EIS and SEIS is, it's sort of tax efficient ways for investors to invest money back into companies, especially sort of startup and companies that are growing. We do a lot of work with those kind of clients. We advise them on shareholder agreements, and we work with other tax advisors on that too. So I think Anura's got a statement, especially the high taxpayers with limited pension allowances.
Okay, so Anura, as a financial advisor, you probably know the nitty-gritty of it a bit more than I, but I certainly think that you're right, people with, who have money available for investment, it certainly is a good thing. I mean, I think linked to that is this thing about royalties that arise out of the digital economy. So people, I think what's happened is that they've tried to close the tax loophole on that. So what used to happen is people used to take their money offshore to avoid there's nothing wrong with it, but avoid the income tax on that. So they've tried to close the loophole on that for royalties arising out of the digital economy. And I think that ties into a couple of other things I wanted to talk about, which was just hi Jack also for joining.
Hello Jack.
Is talk about Uber. I know I've been going on about this, but I think there are a number of key issues that arise out of this budget, which I think go back into the politics of what's going on around technology and technology businesses here. Yeah. Firstly is that fear that where there are like mega tech businesses with huge amounts of VC funding or any kind of billions of pounds worth of funding, that they are able to get away with practices that other businesses simply cannot. And I think Uber has fallen within that. And I think that, so that's the first thing. I think this whole thing about kind of making sure that those larger tech businesses are also being taxed, kind of ethical in the way that they're dealing with their tax affairs has come into this. I think it's a realization that there needs to be, and I think that something needs to be done around it. So what I saw today, we were talking about there was a data breach by Uber.
Uber, yeah.
So maybe you want to say what that was about.
There was. I think it was the breach actually happened a year ago. So it was quite a while back, this breach, but it only came into sort of fruition now. With any company holding data and breaching it in such a way is a big issue, especially with the GDPR coming in next year. The general data protection regulations, which will change the landscape for how data is processed by companies, how data is held, whether or not we should get consent for sending the data that we hold of people to third parties, and so that kind of consent has to be expressly given, and it's more of a transparent process, and it's also making sure that companies have the right technologies in place to protect the data they hold.
But I think the thing about this is that is obviously the new regime as of May, but the breach happened under the old regime, which still required reporting. And in this case, 57 million user and driver details were taken, and a ransom was given to avoid the kind of disclosure of that breach. Now, that's a company that has literally taken someone's information and and not kind of fessed up when it's gone wrong. So I think that shows something about the behaviour in this kind of space, which I think is.
And so obviously it's an issue with the current old regime, with the regime we have right now with the Data Protection Act. But if that happened with the GDPR in place, I think there'll be greater repercussions with that kind of company. We're looking at up to 20 million euros or 2% of global turnover in terms of fines. So you could really shut a company down. I think that with this particular, so I think it was important to highlight that, firstly because the fact that GDPR is coming in means that we've talked to businesses who are smaller in scale and they take these things seriously. We've had businesses come to us, care businesses come to us, they're clearly dealing with a lot of sensitive information, but they're concerned about how they're doing it. So what you want to see is a playing field in which, every business is kind of being held to the same standards. So I think that was one thing. They're not having a great time generally, so they were obviously slapped on the wrist by the regulator, the TfL here. So that's going through an appeal process, or will be appealed, or that's likely to be appealed, and so I think they're getting the legal team together to see to try and challenge it.
And then we've got issues around the gig economy and the Court of Appeal decision. So
sure. So as some of you may know, there was a number of workers that worked for Uber that claimed that they were actually employees and not genuinely self-employed contractors, so they were entitled to holiday pay, sick pay, and the rest of it. The Employment Tribunal and the Employment Appeals Tribunal, when the original decision got appealed by Uber, pretty much declared that Uber drivers are employees rather, and not self-employed. And so that decision then went to the Court of Appeal to decide upon, and they've affirmed the decision by the Employment Appeals Tribunal. So they've confirmed the position that Uber drivers are actually employees and not self-employed, which is really interesting.
And I think it kind of it's a good reason to talk about it again now, given that we're coming to the end of the year, because we had the Taylor review, I think in July or so. And in that they were talking about getting rid of tribunal fees, dealing with workers in the gig economy, and trying to work out how to extend rights to them. So I think the Court of Appeal decision, some of the decision making around Uber and some of these other businesses, whether it's in the Court of Appeal, the regulator, so on and so forth, and linking it back to the budget and what they're trying to do, I think it just shows that I think the time where just large tech businesses could just operate without having oversight on the basis that they represented something innovative, I think is gone. There are, I mean, as people who work with tech businesses, I don't know. I think people always are slightly averse to having too much regulation, and I can see why. But I think that this is probably bringing them more in line with what's happening.
Well, I think from what I've read in terms of parliamentary debates, I've got a feeling that next year there's going to be tabled some legislation to resolve this kind of uncertainty, to make it very clear what the test would be for someone who's self-employed or someone who's employed. And from what I've read so far, I've got a feeling that the government will say that for someone to be self-employed, they have to contract through a limited company. For example, in the IT space, a lot of contractors used to just contract as individuals and not through a limited company. And I think that these new changes will make a big difference to contractors generally in the workspace. Yeah.
So look, I mean, there's lots to be looking back on and thinking about in the year ahead. And I think as employment space is always one to watch.
Yeah,
you know?
it's always changing.
There's lots coming up. Brexit will happen in a couple of years. We'll have to see what happens to employment rights then as well. So very few things. So I just wanted to touch on Uber because of the kind of the fact that we're going to be talking about intellectual property in the tech space. So I mean, I don't know whether that takes us very neatly to just what today's session was going to be about, which was intellectual property. Yeah. So I don't know whether you want to start off by explaining a little bit about what we mean by that.
Yeah, sure. So intellectual property is obviously quite a broad term. It's about anything that you've done creative is how to protect that piece of technology or work. And in law, there's different ways to protect that. So you've got a copyright, for example, which is automatic. So if, for example, Balmy takes a photograph, posts it on Facebook, and someone else uses it, she's got a copyright because she created that photograph. She's done it. It's an original piece made, taken by her. And if it's used by anyone else, then she could bring a claim for copyright infringements. That's one way of protecting.
It might be worth saying we do have a client that does this, don't they?
Yes.
So we do have a client that basically will scour the internet and then find infringing photographs, and then we will on their behalf write to the person who has used the image to say, look, you've used the image, you either need to pay a license fee or take it out.
And so it's actually a lesson to be learned. So if you're developing a website, or if you're developing any technology, or if you're creating your brand, make sure that you're not using anyone's photograph or any existing logos out there, because you'll probably get a copyright infringement letter
at some point.
Saying that you need to pay X amount. It could be quite substantial. So we would recommend paying for a licensed photograph, showing that you've paid for it.
Or creating your own, or using a photostock image, or something that allows you to use it.
So there's different. The other ways, copyright is just one way of protecting your rights under intellectual property. The other way is through trademarks, which are registered with the Intellectual Property Office. So you would make a trademark application, and then the Intellectual Property Office would make an assessment about that logo or that design that you've done, and it will assess whether or not it's anything similar out there. And if it's very similar to other logos, then they'll say, no, you can't trademark it because it's too similar to McDonald's or whatever there is out there.
I think what's useful is to give people an example here, because we do some trademark kind of applications and so on and so forth for people. And, sometimes people say, well, why can't I use this? This is my name. But it's not that. It has to be something very different. So if you take something like Kodak, there was no other word like that. It's easy to trademark it. You take something like the London Law Practice, the London Law and Practice are not unique words.
They're not unique words.
So you have to combine it with an image. So quite a lot of times, I think Tanya has a question, by the way.
We'll come back to you, Tanya.
Quite a lot of times people will come to us for those things, and I think it's useful actually to give the guidance on that. But I think Tanya has a question.
Can you be sued for copyright infringement even if you use an image off the internet for a social media post? That's interesting. I guess it depends on what context you're using that image. But if you are passing off as that image belongs to you and you're using it, then yeah, it would be a copyright infringement, because that, say for example, if you have a company page on your Facebook, that's equivalent to your company website. It's quite similar. And if you're posting on there pictures of that you haven't got authorization for, then yes, you can get a copyright infringement claim against you.
Yeah, so I don't know whether, Tanya, you just missed that bit. Basically, you need to have either the permission of the person who's taken the picture, or use something that you're allowed to use, a photo stock image, and so on and so forth. But yeah.
But it is interesting why she's mentioned that. I think I know why she said that, because what tends to happen sometimes when you're using Twitter is you sort of retweet,
yes,
right?
yeah.
Or you're retweeting existing posts. And I think in that instance, because social media is giving you the functionality to do that, I don't think that would infringe as such, because you're already giving permission for someone to use it, because by putting it on Twitter.
I think that's true. I think if you have an article and you put something up and you
expect people to retweet.
You expect people to retweet and follow. So, no, thank you for that question. Thank you to Samir who's joined. I think Zed has joined us as well. So thank you to both of you. If you have questions, please do join in and ask us. We're covering IP and actually anything in today's budget, technology, starting up a business, anything in those areas, we're happy to talk about it. I wanted to actually ask about, I think that most people will be familiar with intellectual property as being, things that they've written, or photographs and trademarks, but maybe they're not familiar with things like, so quite often what we get asked about is the back-end processes of building an app, for example. Can we get a patent? What are how is it that we can protect all the kind of work and process documents that have been done around it? Do you remember that someone recently?
Definitely, yeah.
And I think that it might be helpful to explain. Hi, Zed.
Hi, Zed.
Might be helpful to explain to people how, in those circumstances, they could go around safeguarding their ideas, because you can't just make a trademark application.
Yeah. So what Barbara's talking about as well is patents. Yeah, so patents is another way to protect some sort of technology that you've developed. Patents are difficult to get, and they're also quite expensive. And the design or whatever you're creating has to be very unique. So it's something that's not out there in the market, something completely different and quite creative. And the word they use is inventive. It has to be quite an inventive piece. Now, what tends the law on it is, if it's already out there, or if you've created it and you've already marketed it and you're already selling it, then it's already in the public domain, so it can't be inventive anymore.
Yeah, so we should tell people, if you have a very unique idea, don't tell people
about it. Don't tell people about it.
You'll lose that ability to patent it.
You'll lose the ability to patent it. But there is one way that you can protect it, and that's by if you do need to get into touch with a supplier, for example, who can help you develop that product for you, then you can send them an NDA, which is a non-disclosure agreement, protecting the confidential terms on which that design or whatever you're creating is to be kept confidential, so then it doesn't lose that inventiveness.
So can I ask you a question? So a lot of people will just go online, get an NDA.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So would you recommend getting a downloaded NDA for a patentable product? I think I know the answer to
absolutely not. No, definitely not. So you have to be very careful with NDAs. There is this sort of culture where, especially startups, where they download NDAs and they kind of NDA absolutely everyone. Everyone just gets NDAs. We'll get NDAs.
And we have confidentiality clauses in our agreement.
Already, yeah. So there is a culture of just blanketly sending NDAs out. But what they're not realising is that if it's not drafted carefully, and if it's not specific in terms of what exactly you're keeping confidential, then it could be deemed to be unenforceable or even void.
Yeah. So I think the key thing, what I find really interesting about this, hold on, we've got a question. Should we answer the question?
Yeah,
and then I can keep on. Don't know much about trade up, but I have represented people in the criminal courts for trademark infringement, mainly dodgy DVDs. So be
be careful of dodgy DVDs.
Yeah. No, I think it is. I mean, look, intellectual property is so huge as a subject. It's everything, isn't it? Film rights, books, photographs, everything. So, and maybe Zed, if at some point maybe we can have a conversation about how that can work.
So Jack's just got a question, NDAs, question mark. So just to explain, non-disclosure agreements are confidentiality agreements, really. So it's agreements that you would have between each other to protect confidential information.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah, so that's it. And I think what I was trying to say is that I think in terms of protecting your ideas, I don't think it's a one item thing. So just because you get your trademark, that doesn't mean it's protecting everything around your idea. It just means it's protecting your name and your logo. So just to have a culture of understanding what is it that you want to look after in your business, and making sure that that is protected either in your documents, making sure you've got properly drafted NDAs, properly drafted terms of business, making sure you've got restrictive covenants in place to stop employees taking ideas.
Absolutely.
If they're developing an idea within the business, being clear about if they're contractors, who that idea belongs to. There are so many things to consider.
Definitely. And I guess that's the whole spectrum of protecting your intellectual property. There's also some other areas we haven't touched on, such as registered design rights. You can register a design. It's a bit more difficult because they really look into whether or not the design already exists, if you're able to register it. But if you can't register it, then you can rely on the common law, which allows for unregistered design rights, which are automatic, a bit like copyright. And also going, I guess, across from moving away from how intellectual property is sort of protected, there's quite creative ways in which you can use intellectual property to your advantage. And we spoke about royalties, didn't we, before this Facebook Live event. We talked about how the budget's kind of helping businesses with the royalties, right? Yeah.
So no, I mean what the budget said was basically where people were taking their royalty payments and putting them offshore and avoiding the tax. They've tried to close that loophole. But the reason I mentioned it is because I think that people are just there is a political aspect to the budget. Having said that, I think it would be helpful. I think the other thing about intellectual property and as business people who work with businesses, we're quite aware of this. People are very well. They're concerned about what value their company has, and the intellectual property for a lot of businesses will be their ideas and their know-how. That's what gives them their value, and the intellectual property that they own then can be utilised in lots of different ways. So if you build a platform, you can license it out to people. If you have a very, very solid mark, you can then again license it,
assign it,
so on and so forth. So it can create value and create income streams for yourself. It builds the goodwill. It gives you a base on which to create a valuation for the company. So for lawyers who are working in this space, they would and should be mindful of the fact that it is a little bit longer term. I think that's sometimes something that that takes a little bit of education around as well, because I think, and especially now, understanding how critical your IP is to your value and your valuations is important.
Absolutely, like Bhavani said, it develops goodwill, and if you ever want to sell your company, if you have a patent, then it really increases the value. Usually,
a lot of that. So just being very mindful of it. Building into your business plans the idea that you are going to create, you're going to protect your IP is going to be helpful. And if you go to then an investor to say, we've got trademarks, we've got patents pending, we've got our IP protected, we've got NDAs in place that are properly drafted, that's only going to add to your
create an attractive proposition. To that.
Exactly. So I think that pretty much brings us to kind of what we wanted to cover. I think all we wanted to say was thank you very much to everyone who's watched over this year and contributed, taken part, shared. Please do share the videos. There are a few of them now on our Facebook page and on YouTube.
Hope you're looking forward to Christmas as well.
I'm really looking forward to it. We love it.
We love Christmas.
We love it.
Enjoying those Christmas parties.
We've got ours coming up.
We've got ours coming up.
It's always a good time to let your hair down.
Definitely.
Look, we look forward to seeing everyone in the new year.
Yeah.
At the end of last year, do you remember we had all that stuff that happened, and then end of the first year of Trump, Brexit.
Yes, lots happened this year.
Lots happened this year.
Yeah. So I said Merry Christmas to you as well.
Yeah, Merry Christmas to you too.
Yeah, and if of course all our viewers out there, if they have any further ideas, any suggestions about what we should talk about, then let us know. As long as we can deal with it.
We'd love to get that. Please tell us.
Yeah, please
if you've got anything.
Feedback.
Yeah. It'd be great. So thank you very much. Looking forward to seeing you all in the new year.
Yeah, definitely. Happy New Year in advance, and Merry Christmas.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.